you all so much for being here this morning. I know we're excited about today, and there's other events that are going to be happening at the High Point Museum. Next Saturday is a real special event. I'll let Angela tell you about that because that's exciting. And it's not on my piece of paper, and I don't want to mess it up. So our guest speaker today, we're so honored to have Angela Roberson here, pastor of Congregational United Church of Christ that's here in High Point. I'm sure most of you know her. Pastor Roberson obtained her master's degree in theology from Duke University in 2011 and became the pastor of CUCC, which she was already employed at, serving as an associate pastor. In 2017, she organized the first multi-faith National Day of Prayer in High Point, and in 2019, she organized the High Point commemoration for 400 years of African American history. Pretty exciting stuff. That same year, she was recognized by the High Point Chamber of Commerce as one of the 100-plus women who lead in work and community. Pastor Roberson has a fascinating and complex story to share about the Congregational United Church of Christ, its leaders, its mission, and its ability to help transform the High Point community in many important and positive ways. A teacher and a fascinating speaker, which you probably know, please help me welcome Pastor Roberson.
Well, I want to appreciate all of you who got up on a Saturday morning and came out to the museum for the presentation on this morning. Thank you so very much for being here and being interested in this history. We do have some of our members who are here with us, and if you are a member of Congregational United Church of Christ, just raise your hand. Wonderful, wonderful. So we're going to get right into it. The history of Congregational United Church of Christ. Let's see. So what we have here are some early pictures of the church. So this is our second and third church buildings, because the building that we are in now would be our fourth building. So what is not pictured here is our first building, which the church began on South Main Street here in the city of High Point. And in 1890, there was a publishing arm for the American Missionary Association called the American Missionary. And so I've been able to access that online and have been able to trace Reverend Zachariah Simmons, who came to High Point in 1890 to start the church. Now, what you need to know is that the church started out as Pilgrim Congregational. And so Congregational United Church of Christ is a merger between Pilgrim Congregational and Washington Terrace Congregational. And the churches merged to form Congregational United Church of Christ. What we can see in 1890 from the American Missionary, the publication from the American Missionary Association, is that Zachariah Simmons had a 3-point charge. He had a 3-point charge of Strebe, Salem, and High Point. Now, Strebe and Salem are in Randolph County. And, of course, High Point is here in Guilford. He had a 3-point charge from Randolph County to Guilford County. And in Strebe, one of the things that you need to understand about the American Missionary Association is that when they started a church, school was part of that. So the American Missionary Association had a twofold focus of religion and education. And so the American Missionary Association is one of the early organizations that organized themselves primarily for two things. One, we want to take care of the spiritual needs of black folk. And two, we want to educate black folk. Now you gotta understand that the American Missionary Association was founded in 1849. And historically speaking, 1849 is a year before the Fugitive Slave Act. So if you remember that movie, 12 Years a Slave, all right? The way that Solomon got caught up in that was that, because Solomon was free. He was a free person of color. But the Fugitive Slave Act was enacted, and he was kidnapped, and his kidnapper said, you are a slave, and they sent him down south. And so the point that I'm making here is that the American Missionary Association forms in 1849, a year prior to the Fugitive Slave Act, and they formed for the purpose of, they were abolitionists. They had an abolitionist impetus, and they also wanted to, and they did, educate black folk. So, Zachariah Simmons had a 3-point charge, and let me tell you a little bit about who he was. So I've been able to kind of trace him, and Zachariah Simmons was born in 1850. And what I'm going to say here is he's buried in the Oakwood Cemetery, and the headstone has 1848. Well, let me ask you this. When you die, do you make your headstone? No. And when you die, do you do your own death certificate? There's an informant. So someone gives the information. Your relative or your friend, because it doesn't have to be a relative, your relative or your friend, someone is the informant and gives the information. And the informant said he was born in 1848, and that's why that's on his headstone, but no, he was born in 1850. How do I know? I know that because of the census. And can the census taker put something wrong? Well, I've done enough genealogical research to know that you still need to follow up with what the census takers put. But what I will say is this. I believe this 1850 census because he was an infant. He hadn't even reached his first month birthday. And that's why I do not believe he was born in 1848. I do believe he was born in 1850. So, he was born in 1850. His father was George Simmons. And why am I doing this? Because what you need to know about his father is that his father, one, worked in the turpentine industry. I won't get into that piece, but that was hard work. But one of the significant things I want to let you know about his father is that his father rented out a building during the Reconstruction period to the Freedmen's Bureau. What that means is that Zachariah's father, George, was in the business of educating black folk during the Reconstruction period. So Reconstruction period, that period after slavery, before the 1880s, that period after slavery, but before the 1880s, the Reconstruction period, his father was in the business of educating black folk. Zachariah Simmons Zachariah Simmons was born in Wayne County, North Carolina. It's a neighboring county to my home county. I'm from Pitt County, and Wayne is a neighbor of ours. So, I tell my congregation periodically that I feel pretty good about pastoring them because their first pastor was from Eastern North Carolina, and I am too. So he was from Wayne County, North Carolina, and I can trace him In 1860, his family is still there in Wayne County. In 1870, his family is still there in Wayne County. But in 1880, he's married. He's married to a woman named Mary, but he's still in Wayne County. And the 1890 census is lost to us. There are some few records that are left, but in the main, the 1890 census is lost to us. So I don't know where Zachariah Simmons is in 1890. And I have to, it's been quite a while since I've done this research, so I have to do it again because initially I wasn't able to find him in 1900 either. But I think that based on what the AMA has about him, he should be in Montgomery County or in Randolph County. In 1910, he's in Montgomery County. But he is now married to Eugenia. And Eugenia is from the Walden family, which I'm going to get to that in a moment. In 1920, he's here in High Point. In 1930, he's here in High Point. And Reverend Simmons, Zachariah Simmons, dies in 1938 here in High Point. Let's see where we want to go. So, this is Washington Terrace Congregational Church, because remember, Congregational United Church of Christ is a merger between Pilgrim and Washington Terrace. This church was on Brook Street, which is, Brook Street is not far from our current location. If you are at our current location, you are exiting our parking lot and you make a right and you pass Washington Terrace Park and you come to the light. When you come to the light, you make a right. You make a right and Brook Street is going to be on your left. That's where Washington Terrace Congregational Church was located. All right? And in 1954, Catherine Stanley, how can I say this? Engaged in ministry. Catherine Stanley engaged in ministry at Washington Terrace Congregational Church in leadership at the church. And the reason I'm kind of halting and faltering is because what I need to just say to you is 1954 is the period, they're not ordaining women to ministry. They're not ordaining women for ministry. So she was not an ordained minister of the gospel. But for all intents and purposes, she was their pastor. She was their pastor without a formal ordination, but she cared for the souls of those people. And she led them, and she formed the faith in them. She was about faith formation. This was Catherine Stanley. So this is our current building, 401 Gordon Street. So what you have here is Zachariah, and this is his second wife, Eugenia. Eugenia McLeod. Her people are from Randolph County. So that's the Reverend. And then you have Reverend J. Taylor Stanley, and this is Catherine Stanley. So this is in their later years. You see, this listing predates me, but I think they got it right in terms of the ministers for Pilgrim Church. And you see Reverend J. Taylor Stanley came in 1869, and so he was pivotal in helping the church obtain the monies, the resources to build that church. Let me see. I want to share something with you. So I do family research for my family. So I went to the AUGS conference last weekend, and Association for African American Genealogical and Historical Society. And I had seen some material written by Margot Lee Williams. And so when I went to the meeting on last week and she had a table, I was just absolutely excited and bought everything she had at the table. This being one of those resources. So the name of this book is Born Missionary, the Isley Walden Story. And it will become clearer to you why I am going to read from this. I'm going to read 67, starting at 67. The Journey South. Isley sailed for Virginia just a few days after graduation and ordination, arriving on July 11th. The men on the docks in Norfolk and Portsmouth who greeted him were almost all men of color. He wrote back to the Daily Times in New Brunswick, that would be New Jersey. His report appeared on July 23rd, and a month later in the Goldsboro. Goldsboro is Wayne County. Remember, Zacharias was born in Wayne County, raised in Wayne County, lived in Wayne County for about 30 years. His report appeared on July 23rd, and a month later in the Goldsboro, North Carolina Messenger on August 28, 1879. They were hardworking men, he explained, who had basically good relations with their white co-workers. He explained that he would continue to North Carolina by rail. Isley was headed to Goldsboro in Wayne County, but the train went through some smaller communities first, and Isley decided to explore them. He stopped in Mount Olive, North Carolina. Just as a side note, that's where Nita Cobain graduated from, Mount Olive College. He stopped at Mount Olive, North Carolina, today the home of the University of Mount Olive, a small Christian university. He commented, quote, "At all the stations along the railroads, white and colored men seem to be laboring together as brothers, each trying to earn something to support himself and family. In Mount Olive," he noted, quote, "many a young man owns his horse and buggy, and nearly all the families own their own homes and farms." From Mount Olive, Isley stopped in Dudley. There he found, quote, "the moral standard of this people far superior to any place I was ever at." Let me try to clarify and underscore something here. When you look at the AMA records, one of the things you see is that Dudley was one of the first places in North Carolina that the AMA got entrenched in, that they labored in. And so George and Zachariah's involvement with the AMA precedes his going to Streatley, precedes him coming to High Point. He already had that foundation in Dudley. From Mount Olive, Isley stopped in Dudley. There, he found the moral standard of this people far superior to any place I was ever at. Dudley, he observed, had an AMA-affiliated school and an educational standard, quote, this is Isley talking, beyond that of New Brunswick. New Brunswick, New Jersey, where the New Brunswick Theological Seminary is, from which Isley Walden graduated. Let me move on. Let me get to this. Isley reached Goldsboro on July 19th. He was pleasantly surprised, reflecting that he had left North Carolina. He thought it would not be a good place to return. but surprisingly, he found it to be a fine missionary field. Let me go on. Isley was clearly pleased that there were 800 children of color in various schools in Goldsboro, 300 attending common schools, the remainder being taught in Sunday schools. Let me kind of digress here for a minute to say that when you talk about black church, early black church, you're not just talking about church. You're talking also about education. The Sunday school was not just something that was religious. It was something that was educational. And when you hear that terminology, Sabbath school, what they're lifting up to you is that you went to church in the morning, and after church, you went to school to learn your ABCs and your arithmetic. That was Sabbath school. And this is the experience of Zachariah Simmons. Let's see. So it talks about how the people there received Isley and how that they wanted him to stay in Goldsboro, but he declined and came back to Randolph County, his home. So let me pick up from there. And I read that to you also to help give you a connection to that Zachariah Simmons knew the Waldens in Dudley, in Wayne County. So that he had this AMA affiliation in his home county. And with Isley Walden, the preacher and educator from Randolph County. And so that relationship predates the AMA sending Zacharias to Randolph County. Let me see. For the sake of time, what I want to tell you is that Isley Walden goes back to Randolph County. He starts a church. Well, he actually builds it. When we talk about building a church, we're not talking about he got more members somewhere. We're talking about he physically built a church and a school and preached and educated the black folk of Randolph County in that area of Street. Okay? Now, but he dies in 1884. He dies in 1884, and what we can see from the AMA records is that in 1885, Zachariah Simmons has taken over the pastorate of the deceased Isley Walden. Let's see. And I have a little something from the AMA that was in the 1896 AMA journal. Items from the field. Denominational fraternity from High Point. One of the great hindrances to the evangelization of the colored people in the South is the constant flaunting of denominational banners by ignorant and unprincipled preachers. But I am happy to say that at our special services on Lincoln Memorial Day, this spirit of evil was buried in High Point, at least for one day. It was pleasant to see Methodists, Baptists, and Congregationalists working harmoniously together to make an occasion successful. One brother and wife gave 45 cents. And the pastor of the Baptist church, after speaking a word in behalf of the American Missionary Association, came forward and deposited a quarter on the table. At the same time, urging members to give liberally to help it overcome its great burden of debt. I am pleased also to note the self-denial of two faithful members, a mother and daughter. Now, what we need to understand here is that he's saying two faithful members in High Point. So these are your people, because these are members of Pilgrim. They are not named in this text, but these are Pilgrim members because it's the only Congregational church in High Point in 1896. These are your people. All right. I am pleased to note the self-denial of two faithful members, a mother and daughter of our own church, who out of their poverty gave 50 cents each. Because let me just pause in case you didn't get it. They gave more than the Baptist pastor. Let me move on. Both of these good women are out in service, and although their earnings are very small, they never give less than 25 cents each whenever special efforts are made to raise money for the support of the work. Let's see. What I want to do now is read a portion from, we had our 125th anniversary, celebrated that in 2015. 2015. And so let me read a portion of this to get at Reverend James A. Barber. Congregational United Church of Christ is a merger between Pilgrim and Washington Terrace Congregational churches. In 1925, under the leadership of Reverend James A. Barber, the Washington Terrace Community Methodist Church was organized. So the Reverend Barber, who served Pilgrim in 36, he was first a Methodist minister, okay? In 1927, representatives of that church attended the North Carolina State Conference of Congregational Churches, applied for, and was given membership in the conference. So the Methodists became a Congregationalist. Reverend Barber was duly examined and given full ministerial standing in the conference as a Congregational minister. In 1928, the Congregational Church Building Society provided a loan and grant for Washington Terrace Congregational Church to complete its building on 1714 Brooks Street. After being vacant for a number of years, so we see that he became a Congregationalist, they built a church, so he's pastoring that congregation, but then in 36, 37, he serves kind of as an interim over at Pilgrim. After being vacant for a number of years, the Congregational Christian Church decided to sell Washington Terrace property. Catherine Turrentine Stanley argued that ministry could be refocused and rendered to children and youth. Thus, from 1954 to 1972, Mrs. Stanley was commissioned, which is not the same thing as ordination, was commissioned as the Director of Activities at Washington Terrace Congregational Church, where she organized worship services, conducted confirmation classes, taught Sunday schools, led vacation Bible schools, and provided seminarians with preaching and practical ministry opportunities. And where were those seminarians from? They were from my alma mater, Hood Theological Seminary, Salisbury, North Carolina. I think you got, before you leave today, if you would like, there are some materials on this table on the back, and I've written an article for the North Carolina History Project on Catherine Stanley, and so you can access it online, or you can pick up a copy if you would like. Also, this is Margot Williams, another book written by Margot Williams. And I want to read a portion of this to you as well. Let me go to page 93. A widow carries on. Remember, Isley Walden died in 1884, and Zachariah Simmons became the pastor of Strebe and High Point and Salem. Salem was about 7 to 8 miles from Strebe. So Salem is in Randolph County, about 7 to 8 miles from Strebe. Despite Walden's death, his desire for a legacy of education and spirituality lived on at Strebe. His widow, Eleanor Farmer Walden, continued as the principal teacher as well as postmistress. Mrs. Eleanor Walden continues the schoolwork of her husband, greatly confided in by the people. That was from the American Missionary Association's journal. The ministerial work was assumed by the Reverend Zachariah Simmons, who was the pastor at Salem Congregational Church. In 1888, Henry Ruffin Walden, reportedly a cousin of Isley Walden, married Eleanor Walden, Isley's widow. Henry was apparently about to enter his last year as a student at Hampton Normal School, Hampton, Virginia. He graduated in 1889, returning to Strebe to become a teacher there. An entry for his name in a Hampton Institute publication, and she's done her research, and I did a little bit of my own too, and I actually have seen his name in the on the alumni records. He graduated in 1889, returning to Strebe to become a teacher there. An entry for his name in a Hampton Institute publication stated, quote, teaching with his wife, whom he married before entering the senior class, the American Missionary Society at Strebe, North Carolina. This seems to indicate that Strebe had become a two-teacher school, since Eleanor was still a teacher there. In 1891, Henry wrote an extensive article for the American Missionary magazine about the teaching and missionary work at Strebe. I'm going to stop there. And so what you see here is Henry Ruffin Walden. He had a long tenure at Pilgrim, 10 years, 1925 to 1935. And after his tenure at Pilgrim, here in High Point, he and his wife moved to Richmond County to continue to do ministry there. And so, but according to the records, Henry Walden is also buried at the Oakwood Cemetery here in High Point. And what I want, and the reason that Henry Walden is so important to High Point history and to Congregational United Church of Christ's history is because 23 years after Reverend Walden concluded his ministry in High Point, and 7 years after his death, Reverend Ben Elton Cox is elected as pastor of Pilgrim. And it's Ben Elton Cox, pastor of Pilgrim, who led the desegregation effort here in High Point. He was a freedom rider, and he was also the one who taught the 26 William Penn students. Let me see if I can find that. He's also the one who taught nonviolence to the 26 William Penn students who walked down to Woolworth and sat at the lunch counter. That was Ben Elton Cox. That was the pastor of Pilgrim United Church of Christ. Let me take you back to that time. This is Taylor Branch's Parting the Waters, the King years, 1954 to 1963. Chapter 7, the quickening. No one had time to wonder why the Greensboro sit-in was so different. In the previous 3 years, similar demonstrations had occurred in at least 16 other cities. Few of them made the news. All faded quickly from public notice, and none had the slightest catalytic effect anywhere else. By contrast, Greensboro helped define the new decade. Almost certainly, the lack of planning. Almost certainly, the lack of planning helped create the initial euphoria, because the 4 students at Woolworth had no plan. They began with no self-imposed limitations. They defined no tactical goals. They did not train or drill in preparation. They did not dwell on the many forces that might be used against them. Above all, they did not anticipate that Woolworth's white managers would, instead of threatening to have them arrested, flounder in confusion and embarrassment. The surprise discovery of defensiveness within the segregated white world turned their fear into elation. The spontaneity and open-endedness of the first Greensboro sit-in flashed throughout the network of activists who had been groping toward the same goal. On the first night, the first 4 protesters themselves contacted Floyd McKissick, who, as a maverick lawyer and NAACP Youth Council leader, had joined Reverend Douglas Moore in the Durham ice cream parlor case and other small sit-ins. McKissick and Moore rushed to nearby Greensboro. Let me move on for the sake of time to get to this piece. Before serious reprisals fell upon Greensboro, fresh sit-ins broke out the following morning, Monday, in the surrounding North Carolina cities in Raleigh, Durham, and Winston-Salem. 3 days later in High Point, students assembled at a church before marching toward downtown to the segregated lunch counters. And as it happened, Fred Shuttlesworth had come in from Birmingham to preach the midweek service for the minister of that church. Shuttlesworth became the first eyewitness from the tough, deep South states below North Carolina. He saw the well-dressed students. Aren't you just laughing? He saw the well-dressed students step off in good order, like soldiers in the joyous early stages of a popular war. And he heard that it was the same in the other North Carolina towns, only bigger. Shuttlesworth promptly called Ella Baker at the SCLC office in Atlanta. He was not the first to report to her about the sit-ins, but he was the first voice of authority from the inner circle of the SCLC preachers. This is it, he told them. You must tell Martin that we must get with this, said Shuttlesworth, adding that the sit-ins might shake up the world. The movement first leaped across state lines on the day after the High Point sit-in. I gotta move on, because I know you're gonna want to ask me some questions. I better get this clicker and go to what's next. So this is Reverend Henry Ruffin Walden and his wife. She was a Hargrave. This is Giles Jones, who was instrumental in updating the church there on Fairview and Taylor Street. This is J. Taylor Stanley and Catherine Stanley. This is in the period where the churches have agreed to unite and make one church. Dr. Stanley is legend in the United Church of Christ, is legend in the Southern Conference, because he was the leader of what was called the Convention of the South. What was the Convention of the South? It was all the black churches that he was leading the black folk in what we now call the United Church of Christ. And then you have this integration in 1957, that, you know, the formalization of the United Church of Christ. So there's no black work per se, or on paper, if you will. You know, it takes time for these things to all kind of shake up. But at any rate, he was leading all the black folk in what we now know as the United Church of Christ. This is where we are at 401 Gordon Street. And the Historical Society wanted me to make sure that we got this picture in here. And so this is Reverend Cox. This is Dr. Perry Little, who was a dentist. And these are what people say are the Fountain Girls. This is Lynn and Brenda Fountain. And what you need to know is that the Fountain Girls, their genealogical history comes from Henry Ruffin Walden. They are descendants of Henry Ruffin Walden. So, let me kind of get through this to make sure I give you time to ask me some questions. So what have we done since the merger? Participation in the February 11th prayer vigil. I'm not, you know, you can read. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are some of the things that we have done. I'm very proud of this domestic violence Bible study that we did. I think that was 2017, I believe. And that was a community Bible study. So we had various people, professionals, to come and lead those studies. We partnered with the High Point Museum before. These are some other things that we have done. Other things that we have done. We're very proud of this Shoe Man Water project that we did. We got 7,500 pairs of shoes over the course of did we do that project maybe 4 months, gathering shoes? And then what happens is you send those shoes, well, we don't send them overseas, but we gave them to the Shoe Man Water Project, who then, I can't explain to you how that works, but this is going to equal into some monies to help countries to get water in their famished areas. And so, thank you. We have a 10 o'clock service every Sunday. We are in person and we are on Facebook Live. We also are by teleconference, and you're welcome to be a part of that. Any questions? I answered everything for you.
So, Angela, are there remnants of the buildings that you've spoken of, the Fairview Church and the Washington Parish Church, or those been taken down? I mean, if someone wanted to go look at them, are they still there?
No, because it was 66, I believe, that there was a property exchange. So the church, so the second church was at Fairview and Taylor Street. There's a property exchange whereby the Gifford County Schools gets our property, and then they gave us the property over here on Gordon Street. So that structure no longer exists. What we do have is it's on one of these banners. Yes, I'm just going to walk back here. You can look at it when you go out. But what we do have is a cornerstone for Pilgrim site, and we actually do still have this cornerstone. Pilgrim First Congregational Church, rebuilt 1923, Reverend R.L.C. Houston. Yes.
Why did you just pick out that one church to talk about? Is that the strongest, was that the strongest church that was solidified in that time? Or, I don't understand why churches are not mentioned, but it's just one church.
Because that's what the Historical Society asked me to do, talk about Congregational United Church of Christ.
So I'm really fascinated with the pastor's wife doing Washington Terrace for all those years. That's fantastic to hear about. So did the school operate other than on Sundays in that location?
Pardon me. The question is, at Washington Terrace, did they do other things besides worship service?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
Well, we have someone here that can answer that question. I want to introduce you. I want to introduce you to Reverend Henry Simmons, who is a retired pastor. First of all, what you need to know is that he was a member of Washington Terrace Congregational Church. Yeah, I'm gonna stay beside you so that you can, the mic. Oh, you know what, we got a handheld.
You just have to push that button in to talk.
When you talk, push this button.
To be sure, churches did a great deal to help in the transformation of High Point into a more just and equitable system. The thing about Washington Terrace Congregational Church, it was, in a sense, the smaller of the two churches that merged. Washington Terrace Congregational Christian Church, in my time, there had only about 85 members. No more than 5 were over the age of 21. It was essentially a church that was dedicated to the development of African American young people. And so when there were worship services, we had to lead the worship services. Mrs. Stanley was a formidable, incredible person, but she believed that the church was not necessarily what the pastor did, but how the church experience developed people holistically, so that we were not only taught that we should be concerned about getting to heaven, but also be concerned about how do we navigate the hell we got to go through. Black folk on the way. So we had service projects that we did. We were introduced to persons from other countries, missionaries and so forth. And we had to show our report cards. In other words, you couldn't read the scripture unless you showed your report card.
It's beautiful.
And unless you passed. Now, the reason I'm citing that is because that is in the tradition of the American Missionary Association that Reverend Roberson mentioned, where, and AMA actually began with the Amistad case in 1846. So you've seen the movie The Amistad. I won't go much into that. But the American Missionary Association, which was an ecumenical movement. It wasn't just Congregationalists, it was Presbyterian, it were Unitarians from New England that went into the Deep South at the end of the Civil War to establish not only churches, as Reverend Robertson has stated, but choral societies, libraries, and schools for the newly manumitted enslaved Africans. They started about 500 of them. And so Pilgrim and then eventually Washington Terrace was one of those schools. Now what did we do? where we went by there after school to do homework. We were encouraged to, work with other young people and so forth. The difficulty we faced again was simply, not the difficulty, but the great challenge was that we simply were mostly young people. But out of that church has come at least 4 ministers that I know, 3 doctors, 2 dentists, and a whole host of teachers. So that not only do you have to look just at the numbers of people, but the mission and the work of the church has to be looked at as well. Size doesn't always mean that you're going to do a great deal. What it takes is the ability to work with the development of people. And so that's part of the legacy of the church now, where the site where the Washington Terrace Church used to stand, now there are 4 Habitat for Humanity houses. You see, churches' mission and ministry can continue even when you are not there, like on Sunday. And so I'm proud to be a part of that church and to have known Mrs. Stanley and Dr. Stanley and all, and eventually spent about 8 years working or doing ministry with the agency that the American Missionary Association was folded into, as a part of. And so that's that.
Any other questions?
During the 60s, when Reverend Cox was over Pilgrim, I know back during that time, a lot of pastors corresponded with the AME. Are there any letters that he may have written to tell the progress that he was making in High Point that you may have? Is there any correspondence from that time period?
We should note that Reverend Cox he worked with several organizations. He worked cooperatively and collaboratively with several organizations, but he was a member of CORE. I do have a couple of documents, but it escapes my memory right now as to where I access them, so I can get with you later about that. One of the things that our church spearheaded and I think this will be my close, one of the things that our church spearheaded in 2019 was the commemoration for 400 years of African American history. And so I am wearing today the stole that was made from fabric from Liberia. And we gave these stoles to our living legends. And this is the pendant for that work there. And we have one of our living legends in the audience with it. Will you stand, Elder Davis? And she started out as a principal and started out as a teacher and became a principal serving here in the High Point community. And so how do we determine for her to be a living legend? Because she was the first African American Was it the social worker? No, it was
Health educator.
health educator for Guilford County Health Department for High Point. Thank you again so very much. I would ask that if you don't already have the materials that are on the table, to get those. And when, as you leave, if you would take time to look at our banners, there's one here, one here, and one here. And there's a question here.
You showed a picture of Dr. Little,
Yes.
be on some copy.
Yes.
Where would I find a copy of that picture? I've gone
That-
to the High Point library and I've researched and I've not been able to find it. That's the picture.
Where did you get this picture?
That is used from the high school enterprise, but our curator, he can get you afterwards, I'll give you our curator's information.
Can't hear what it says.
All right, see the director, and she'll be able to get you this picture, or get you in contact with how to get this picture. Thank you so very much. You all have a wonderful day. Next Saturday at 1. Next Saturday at 1, we will be back here for a presentation, an event, the Montfort Point Marines. If you don't know who the Montfort Point Marines was, raise your hand. Okay, so the Montfort Point Marines were the first black Marines, 1942 to 1949, at Camp Montfort Point in eastern North Carolina. And so President Obama signed and authorized for them to be honored for their service by giving them or their families a Congressional medal. And next Saturday at 1 o'clock, a High Point family will receive the Congressional medal on behalf of the High Point men who served as the Montfort Point Marines. Thank you.
On behalf of the High Point Historical Society, I want to thank everybody for coming. I'm the president, Julie Rayner, and if you're interested in the High Point Historical Society, we have some other educational programs going on the rest of the spring. We have information on the back table about joining, and I'd love for you to consider participating with us. So thank you again.
Thank you.